Good day, everyone, and welcome to the Recruitment and Retention of Home Visiting Staff Conference. As a reminder, today's presentation is being recorded. At this time, I would like to turn the conference over to Katrina Coburn. Please go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Doris. My name is Katrina Coburn. I'm the e-learning coordinator for the McVie Technical Assistance Coordinating Center, and I'll be your facilitator today. On behalf of the TAC, I want to welcome you to today's webinar. During today's webinar, you will be invited to explore how home visiting models and state leaders are approaching intentional staff recruitment and retention practices to ensure high-quality, ongoing services to children and families. You should have received an email yesterday with the link to download your pre-webinar registrant packet, and that contains a PDF of these PowerPoint slides and a handout that we will be referring to later on in the webinar. So be sure to download that if you haven't already done so. Just a quick reminder, if at any time today you have a question or comment about the presentation, we would love to hear it. To submit your question or comment, you will use the control panel that's located to the right of your screen, and at the bottom of that panel is an open text field where you can type your questions. Those will come to me today, and I'll be monitoring the question box, and will share your comments or questions with our presenters during their Q&A time. I would like to now introduce Lori Wolfgang. Lori has been the Region 6 Home Visiting Project Officer for 5 years and was previously in the HRA Office of Performance Review in Dallas, Texas. Lori.
Thanks, Katrina. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon and good morning to some of you. Thank you for joining us for today's presentation on recruitment and retention of home visiting staff. As Katrina said, I'm Lori Wolfgang, and I'm the Project Officer for the Region 6 McVie grantees. On behalf of the HRSA Regional and Central Office staff, it's my pleasure to join all of you and welcome you, our grantees, our local implementing sites, and other partners for today's discussion. Yesterday, March 23rd, marked the 5-year anniversary of the Maternal, Infant, and Early Childhood Home Visiting Program. The program was enacted as part of a landmark legislation known as the Affordable Care Act with a $1.5 billion investment. This national recognition of the importance of early brain development and the evidence base that supports home visiting has established a whole new service arena and discipline. The program is unique in that it's one of the first evidence-based policy initiatives and funds multiple models proven to show positive impacts on family well-being. While these models provide the structural framework for the service delivery, or recipe, if you will, and the feds provide the infrastructural systems framework guidance by which to implement the program, it still comes down to people. The dynamic relationship between a home visitor and the family are at the core of McVie services. So hiring and keeping high-quality staff will impact model fidelity, capacity, cost, and ultimately family outcomes. With 5 years under our belt, our primary focus is shifting away from inputs and infrastructure and more towards the outputs of the program, including volume of families served, number of home visits, attrition rate, overall capacity, cost, and outcomes. And we're finding that a primary contributing factor to all these outputs is your frontline staff. There's so many aspects of home visiting workforce to consider because the program requires such highly experienced, well-trained, well-supported staff to implement the specialized service. Which brings us to the topic of today's webinar. Today we're going to hear from 3 grantees as they share their own experiences with hiring home visiting staff, orienting and onboarding new staff, and ongoing professional development of home visitors. I hope this experiences shared today by some of your own peers will help you with some tools and ideas to help your own programs continue to thrive. Thank you again for joining us today.
Thanks, Lori. It's great to have you with us today. Now, on to our first speaker. Tracy Lansing is the Healthy Families America Training and Professional Development Director, providing support, technical assistance, and training to sites nationwide. Tracy brings 20 years of experience in child abuse prevention, home visitation, infant early childhood mental health services, and program development. A licensed social worker, Tracy earned bachelor and master's degrees from the University of Kansas School of Social Welfare and is currently pursuing a Level 4 endorsement with the Kansas Association of Infant and Early Childhood Mental Health. Tracy lives in Lansing, Kansas, and is a proud parent of a teen daughter, 4 dogs, and 1 cat. Welcome, Tracy.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And I want to thank Katrina and Lena and Brittany also for their help at the Technical Assistance Coordinating Center for inviting me to join you today. I want to move to the next slide and just do a quick overview of my presentation and what we'll be looking at in my time. The first thing that we want to emphasize is that staff retention starts with hiring the right staff. And we know that home visiting is not for everyone. Hiring and maintaining quality staff is a key indicator of successful programs. It does take time to select, nurture, and support staff so that they will feel successful and comfortable in working from a strength-based perspective while addressing challenging issues. What we know is that staff retention is closely connected to family retention, and in many cases, families may decline services due to changes in workers. Therefore, we want to look at those factors that you should consider when hiring, looking at the importance of hiring staff with reflective capacity. Those are the staff that will feel more competent and experience positive outcomes with families and stay with their jobs longer. So this presentation will also focus on what to look for on resumes and when interviewing to evaluate for the hiring factors and reflective capacity. While my presentation today refers often to the home visitor role, the factors and the things to look out for will span across all roles in strengthening programs, and they can be used whether you are a state leader, a program administrator, or supervisor. On the next slide, we get into the factors to consider when hiring. And the first several bullets were adapted from Barbara Wasick's article, Staffing Issues for Home Visiting Programs. We've added one final bullet related to reflective capacity that I will get into further as we speak today. The first bullet related to professional experience and education. What we want to share here is that experience really does count. And regardless of a person's education level coming into the position, we know it's very important or critical to provide quality staff training and supervision by experienced staff and professionals. And in that aspect, my co-presenters today will explore how you can look at that quality onboarding and staff training further. The second area to consider is related to race, ethnicity, and culture. And what we want to emphasize here is that the research does not support the concept that staff must share race, ethnicity, or culture with families to be effective. Sometimes being of the same culture does not always guarantee that your services are culturally sensitive. Though it can be helpful to have staff that have experienced different cultures and their own bias in the past so they can see where the family is coming from. Continuing and looking at staff with those different cultures or aspects is the key is that we're looking for their awareness and willingness to learn about others in that process. Again, ongoing and continuing cultural humility, cultural sensitivity training should be provided to all staff regardless to continue that environment of trust and value of families that are served. As we get into the next bullet, experience, age, and maturity, our point here is that staff do need to have maturity to set reasonable boundaries. Staff will be supporting parents and families in becoming independent and making their own decisions. And we also know that staff that have, whether it be experience with young children or other services or their parents themselves, those types of experiences do enhance their credibility with parents and families that they serve. As it relates to gender, what we want to emphasize here is that having male staff or home visitors can be extremely effective, especially at reaching out to dads. What we want to look at are, again, cultural issues related to gender expectations when we assign home visitors specifically to families. Whenever you can match the worker to the family versus just who has an opening on their caseload is always ideal. as you're moving forward and being sensitive to families' needs and staff strengths. Finally, interpersonal and supportive skills, what you're looking for here is, does this person have an ability to develop a trusting relationship, as that's critical to the success that they have with families? Are they able to support parents in strengthening those parents' abilities to meet their own needs? So now we're going to move into the reflective capacity piece onto the next slide. And first, I just want to share our definition related to the capacity to exercise introspection, the willingness to learn more about the fundamental nature, purpose, and essence of how we as humans experience this world and how our worldview is impacted by that experience. And as we go to the next slide, we'll emphasize the why do I care aspect. Why is this important? Why is it important to hire staff with reflective capacity? Bottom line is, working with families of high stress or overburdened can be at times quite stressful. Home visitors are exposed to a wide variety of challenging situations and behaviors that may, one, trigger an emotional reaction to a parent's behavior based on their own experiences in their past, or two, may be in conflict with the home visitor's own value system. So the capacity to give oneself empathy and contain judgment and reaction is critical to maintaining healthy relationships with families. And staff who feel comfortable sharing their feelings and experiences with a supervisor are more likely to respond in sensitive ways and less likely to project their own uncomfortable feelings onto the families. Self-reflective staff are able to identify and own what they are feeling without blaming families. Their willingness to reflect and participate fully in supervision reduces burnout, and it allows for a safe place for feelings to be validated and processed. In that, they are able to support their own survival skills and strategies and practice self-care. So staff, bottom line, that have reflective capacity retain families longer and make for a more collaborative work environment. Their ways of being thoughtful and responsive with others translates directly to their work with families. On the next slide, we have listed out some of the factors or pieces that staff with reflective capacity have, their qualities and characteristics. Staff with reflective capacity have an interest in and ability to see things from multiple points of view. They take an ecological perspective, meaning they explore their situation broadly. They look, for example, beyond the parent-child relationship further at the child's development status and how that may contribute to their relationship with their parent. They're interested at the same time in what other resources the family brings to the situation. They wonder or they're curious with the parent about what they've tried before. Staff with reflective capacity have knowledge of the infants and toddlers that they're working with and the families that they're serving. They're self-aware. They're clear about their own values. They're clear about their own triggers and aware of when those arise. They have a balanced and realistic view of relationships, including both positive and negative aspects. And they're comfortable thinking and talking about relationships and their own personal feelings that arise in relation to those relationships. They're consistent in considering other people's feelings, other people's wants and needs, and they take those into account in their responses. Moving to the next slide, we have identified some of the benefits for programs and coworkers and supervisors when you have staff with reflective capacity. So here we have the concept that in general, these staff have a positive approach to other people in their world. They assume that relationships can survive negative feelings, and they attempt to communicate with others rather than withdraw or reject them. In addition, they will take responsibility for their own contributions and responses, especially in difficult situations. They can tolerate ambiguity, and this is important because they are comfortable knowing that they do not have to have a solution right away, but they can sit with not knowing and spend time figuring out what the actual primary problem or issue is before jumping to solutions. They're able to consider options to move forward. Staff with reflective capacity understand that others cannot make them feel a certain way. Rather, they know that if someone is reacting to them with a very strong emotional response, it might be something attached to their own experiences with others that's being triggered. And they know what they need to bring themselves back into balance after a stressful day or a stressful incident. They have self-care practices and are able to self-regulate so that they come back to work that afternoon or the next day refreshed and ready to go. On the next slide, we have getting into what you're actually going to be looking for when you're talking with a person, scheduling interviews, reviewing resumes. So what we have here initially is when you are setting up and planning for that interview, first thing is keep in mind the applicant's behavior, meaning realistically what it means for them to come in and apply for a new position. They may have anxiety, they may have fears, they may be nervous, so keeping that in mind as well. But in the job interview, are they able to connect with you? Do you have a conversation? Do you have opportunities where you can see that they're considering your questions before they're responding? Are you comfortable in their presence? So how do you feel in their presence? Are they able to share their feelings and what it's like to go through the interview process or what they are interested or thinking about related to the position? Moving into the next slide, we have some sample interview questions for you to consider. So as Katrina mentioned prior to signing into the webinar, you received information, and that includes a reflective capacity handout that covers a lot of the material I'm sharing today. In that reflective capacity handout, we actually have tips and additional sample interview questions that you may choose to include in your hiring process. Here are just 3 examples of those questions that I particularly enjoy because they get at different aspects. The first one helps you see what other types of experience they have in addition to their formal education that will help them in this position. The second bullet gets to the self-care piece. How do they take care of themselves? How do they regroup when they've been through a challenging situation? And finally, one of my favorite questions is, what do you think it is like to be your supervisor? And what do you need to work on? To start giving you a clue of how they interact with others and how they might be with you as well as their coworkers and the families that they're serving. On the next slide, we have a couple of other tips related to the interview process. And this is to think about offering up a challenging situation or asking them to describe for you a time when they were in a challenging situation and how did they handle it. Again, you're looking for, are they able to explore multiple perspectives? Do they suggest looking for the meaning behind the behavior or what caused the challenging situation and how the other people in that situation may have felt? Or are they rushing to judgment or sharing their viewpoint only? And then we also recommend looking at a sample scenario and how that person explores that scenario. Are they curious? Are they asking questions? Are they seeking additional information? And in the handout that you receive, we have an actual scenario sample that you can pose, or you can certainly create your own based on maybe an experience a staff has had in their role on the team, obviously keeping out the identifying information, but giving them an opportunity to really respond to something that might actually be a situation they'll be faced with in the job. And moving into the next slide, we have often with the hiring process, we also look for references and getting feedback from those. And what we have provided are some sample questions, and again, there are several more on the handout that you received that get into a little bit deeper information and feedback from their references. So, for example, if on the first bullet, if a person worked with a range of families, did they work better with a certain type of family or a certain different type of coworker? If yes or no, why? How were their relationships with coworkers? Was this a person you felt comfortable with coming to for support or advice, etc.? And these questions are intentionally designed to sort of give you those multiple perspectives and understand how the person is able to process and consider other people's feelings in their work, as well as possibly personal relationships. So, again, there are a few more questions offered in the handout. And then if we can move to the next slide and our final sort of tips around the hiring and looking for these factors and reflective capacity. We recommend that you invite the potential coworkers and other staff on the team to join in a second interview. It's a wonderful way to get buy-in from existing team members, to meet the person, also give them an opportunity to join in that process and give the candidate an opportunity to meet other people and get different input about the role. The other thing that we like to also point out that can be helpful is to be very clear with the candidate about the demands of the job. Any way that you can address or share how they're working with families that possibly have challenging issues such as substance use, domestic violence, mental illness, and how if you can provide clarification with their role, even looking at the types of responsibilities and expectations during the interview process, and give them a glimpse of the work whenever possible prior to offering the position. Meaning, do you have just even a 2-minute clip from a sample home visit that they can watch during that process will help them start to think about if this is a position that's for them, that they're interested in, and they know what they're getting into. And so, finally, I just want to say thank you very much. I've enjoyed being a part of today's presentation, and I look forward to questions. I'll send it to Katrina.
Thank you, Tracy. We do have a few minutes to take some questions for Tracy, and I see some of you have been very busy in the question box. So, Tracy, I'm just going to pull one of those for you. I'm going to start you out with a tough one.
Okay.
We had someone, let me say it was Greta, who said, all of my staff were hired before I got here in January, and they all were hired straight from college with no work experience. So I'm wondering what kind of advice you might have for her.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you. Good question. A couple tips come to mind or some thoughts for you to consider, especially since you're really forming a new team and the experiential piece is something that you want to build on. Ideas to possibly, if it's at all possible, to find whether it be a sister program or a partner, some staff that have lots of experience that they can hang out with and join with. But if you need to keep it just with your team or if that's not available, we would always talk about sort of just regrouping, sitting down as a team and raising that, sharing that, just what you said. We're all kind of new in this. We have great education, but the experience piece is lacking. how will we work on that together? Anytime you can get them to share buy-in or their own thoughts, then you're actually being reflective with the staff, and they'll do that when they're with families. So the best thing you can do with staff is to be with them the way that you want them to be with the families that they're serving. And we could probably go into much more detail, but I will keep it at that and see if Katrina wants to add or give me a new question.
No, I think that was good. And we've had several people ask that in a variety of ways. So we have an interesting question from Robert. If you have any advice on where or how you advertise to find applicants with reflective capacity?
That's a great question. So, and people have mentioned to me that sometimes they feel that they have a limited staff or options, a limited number of candidates. So regardless of where you do advertise, I think the process is as much as you can incorporate looking for reflective capacity. You might be surprised at where those people might come from. So obviously I'm not familiar with your own community or things like that. But what we would suggest is wherever possible kind of sharing the message broadly, but possibly looking at alternatives. So whether it be versus the typical college or job posting board, maybe looking at community leaders, sort of networking to share that there's a position open and having those posted in different non-traditional locations. And you may have done that. So I guess I would just emphasize how important it is to be open when you're looking at the position qualifications. Put out your, what you have to have as requirements, and use the reflective capacity screening process to sort of give you the help the prime candidate sort of come to the top or rise to the top on when you make your selection. Thank you.
Tracy, we're having some sound difficulties. Doris, I don't know if you can help with that at all. But there's a lot of vibration going on, so I don't know if you moved around in your room or something.
I'm sorry. No, I'm trying not to.
Okay, that was good. You're good now.
Okay.
Whatever you're doing, keep doing that. And then we have time for just one more question. How do you select the best person when you are faced with a limited or unskilled applicant pool?
Yeah, great question. Again, I think focus really on the reflective capacity piece, because you can always provide training, as my amazing co-presenters are going to go into detail. You can support around the skill experience of the training. What you need is the people with the characteristics that allow them to establish trusting relationships, that care about other people, that are really inviting, that can speak with others, that understand they're going to be possibly out in the field by themselves in a variety of environments and homes, and that they're looking forward to that and they're willing to learn from other people. So when you really focus in on those reflective pieces and possibly incorporate some of our suggested questions into the interview process, it will quickly come to light those that have a sense of being willing to learn from others, and those that are kind of stuck in their own values or maybe rush to judgment too quick. And you'll start to glean who would be the best candidate, knowing that you can always provide additional training on specific things related to, the tasks of the job at hand.
Great. Thank you, Tracy. That's a great answer. We have a lot of questions coming in, and I want to encourage people to keep sending those. I will get those to Tracy so she can respond to that, and we will put those questions and answers in the post-webinar packet. So feel free to keep sending those. But I do want to move on to our next presenter, and Tracy mentioned Jan. Jan Watson has 27 years of experience with parents as teachers. She began her work with PAT as a parent educator in 2 St. Louis area school-based programs, and came to the PAT National Center in 1998. Her previous work at the National Center included writing trainings, being a national trainer, providing on-site technical assistance for Bureau of Indian Education programs implementing PAT in Bureau schools, and managing a responsible fatherhood grant. During her first 2 years of McVie, she provided program support and technical assistance as a model developer to grantees implementing PAT as one of their evidence-based models. Currently, Jan is the Wyoming McVie Project Director for the Parents as Teachers National Center. She holds a master's in the art of teaching with an emphasis in early childhood from Webster University and a bachelor's degree in education from the University of Connecticut. Welcome, Jan.
Thank you, Katrina. As we were hiring staff and ramping up services when our McVie grant began, we discussed the variety of things that we needed to consider as we developed an orientation and training onboarding process. And it was really important from the very beginning to ensure that staff was well informed about the requirements of the McVie grant, the organizational requirements of the local implementing agency that was delivering the PAT model, and the model requirements of parents as teachers. So we needed to consider the fact also that the PAT staff would become a part of the system of existing early care providers, and that it would be really important early on to include staff in any of the relevant, and when I say staff, I really should say early care providers, in these early trainings that were already part of the existing workforce, and it was important to provide opportunities at that point also to grow their skills. Next slide, please. We took our initial onboarding orientation and training schedule and organized it into a checklist format. As you can see from this slide, which is just a part of the checklist we developed, it provides an easy way to track onboarding activities for each staff member, including the date they were hired and the date each orientation or training activity was completed. Another important reason to have this initial onboarding process formalized in some kind of way, and really whatever works best for you and your organization, is that when staff turnover occurs, then there is at least a system in place to ensure that new staff receive that same information and training as the existing staff. We weren't thinking about this at the time, but then a logical next step has been to include this entire checklist as part of each staff person's personnel file. And then as professional development or additional trainings occur, then that also can be included and tracked. Another thing that we encountered is, as you can see from the slide, we provided orientation trainings for the McVie grant. And we found that although McVie had been around for a few years, when we began the work with our Wyoming staff, we discovered that there wasn't very much background and awareness of the focus of this particular funding and work. So we made sure that we took additional time, in addition to the basic orientation to McVie, and did follow-up conversations, and whether it would be on the phone during a conference call or also as we were doing site visits. Orientation was also provided for the overall benchmark plan and the data collection system to track the benchmark constructs, as well as the benchmark data collection procedures. And the complexity of that required us having the evaluator unpack and really provide several different trainings, because there's a number of different layers to it, and we wanted to make sure that accurate data was being collected from the start. The other piece added to this was CQI and what CQI was and the purpose for it, as well as the process to implement CQI. Additionally, we did an orientation for our PAT visit tracker system, And we did originally a face-to-face on this and then several follow-up ones because we wanted to help staff feel very comfortable tracking the specific home visiting information as well as program model components that we needed to track. And then finally, it was very important to make sure that the staff was oriented to their local implementing agency's mission, their work and mission and their policies and their requirements. So that took, a little bit of time to accomplish, but it was very important in terms of providing basic background to this work. Since we were only implementing the PAT model, we had a little bit of an easier time than many states did who needed to ensure multiple model trainings took place. So what we did was we brought our national PAT trainers to Wyoming for a week, and in that week they completed both the foundational and the model implementation training. Next slide. Thank you. We also did, as you can see, training on benchmarks and constructs. And since a lot of them were related to maternal and child health, and we knew that majority of our staff was relatively new to this aspect, we provided training on each of the topical areas. It was really wonderful because we were able to find experts for almost every topic and provide initially at least a face-to-face training. The maternal depression part required two parts to do that training initially because we wanted to make sure that staff was provided with a solid background in maternal depression and how to do referrals as needed and what the resources were in the community. But also the second training, we needed to orient staff to the Edinburgh and information on how to score that. You can see on this slide, too, that we've got information. We included a training on community resource and referral. And we took a little bit of a different approach to lift this piece up and designed an activity for each site to do to ensure that they were familiar with a variety of the resources and agencies that were in their community. Part of the reason we did it this way was because we had several staff that were brand new to these communities that they were serving. And we wanted to make sure that they had a really good idea and familiarity with what was there that they would be able to link families to as needed. So we asked them we did set it up kind of as a scavenger hunt activity on paper and had them respond and identify community resources that they located, names, contact information, location, and had them get pamphlets and brochures also that were related to the benchmarks. We then asked and made sure that we conveyed the real important piece of having accurate information because we know from working with high-risk families that they may not try a second time. So we wanted to make sure that they were pretty clear on what was the qualifications for that family to access that service as well. So we emphasized additionally, because this is a really important piece to our model, that as they were connecting families, that they didn't just hand them a number and a name of an agency, but they really helped them navigate the system and access, whether it would be having conversations with how to do that, but providing that balanced line of support so that they would go ahead and follow through and access what was needed. You may notice on some of these slides that are part of our onboarding that we don't have a piece on child development and parenting. A big part of our PAT curriculum is around resources to support parent knowledge as well as all areas of child development. So we decided it really was not necessary to add an additional training for this piece. But what we did do is we did develop a crosswalk so that parent educators could easily locate resources that were related to any need that the family might have, as well as benchmark information. Next slide, please. I so appreciate what Tracy said earlier about her point about providing a glimpse of the work during the interview process, because we know that being a home visitor is really a unique and challenging job. And once hired, it's important, I think, to equip and support their knowledge and skills about how to successfully engage families as well. So the trainings on this slide really support them effectively engaging and working with the families. And although these maybe were not considered required kinds of training, we decided to begin to ensure best practice approach from the start. So we wanted to provide a training in engaging high-risk families that got into strategies and ways to do that, the Bridges Out of Poverty training, and then motivational interviewing, because we felt this would really help equip staff at the beginning level of knowledge, awareness, and the skills that were necessary to engage and partner with families. Our goal was also to support quality service and outcomes. We were also considering, in the event of staff turnover, that need to think about how we would take them through these same processes, because we might not be able to do some of these trainings face-to-face. So we have integrated reflective practice and some reflective supervision skills that are being supplemented by our early childhood mental health consultant as she does monthly consults with the staff. So most of these initial onboarding activities were done face-to-face, and we had to think about other issues that were coming up as our home visitors were beginning to deliver services. So what we did was, as issues popped up and were identified, we responded with both targeted technical assistance that would be done either by a phone call or by a webinar, depending on what the challenge was, and also if the support would be beneficial to all of the staff. One challenge that came up that was relevant to all of the staff had to do with engaging teen parents. So we went ahead and asked our teen specialists to go ahead and really develop a webinar specifically around the questions that were asked, as well as broaden the view of strategies that would work for everyone to help engage young parents. The other thing that popped up was we had a parent educator who had not done home visiting before and was concerned about some issues around safety. So we went ahead and did a consult during a site visit to kind of discuss what some strategies were that would help her feel more safe and secure. What we really discovered around this was that being flexible and mobilizing resources in a timely manner was really important as services were ramping up. Next slide, please. So as we look forward to this next step, we're currently in the process of developing a system of training to continue to build the knowledge, awareness, and skills of all early care providers. So we divided the training plan that we're doing. It'll be moving into a formalized training plan or a system of training, was to develop 3 different areas or buckets. And so we've got our PAT affiliate bucket that has some specialized trainings that we need to do that are related to model components, as well as our core competencies. So we focus on those individually, but we also look very broadly to what other skills and professional development activities would be helpful for all home visitors. Next slide, please. So as we move forward with this process, we are going to continue to assess the professional development needs of all early care providers. And what's really neat is, as we've gotten some ideas on initial topics, that folks have expressed interest in, it's apparent that many of these trainings are relevant to all groups. We've had a request for toxic stress training, engaging high-risk families, and more professional development and information on reflective supervision. So as you can see, there's that overarching broad topics that will relate to all three of these groups, as well as some trainings that will help home visitors engage and work with families. We have had recent conversations also about the best way to support the work that is already in progress. And so some of the agencies have done surveys to assess what the needs of their early care providers are. So we're taking a look at those to make sure that we add that into the mix and consider those needs. Additionally and lastly, we will provide support for conference speakers, for state trainings or local trainings, and resources that will continue to support the quality work in Wyoming. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. We now have a few minutes to take some questions that have been coming in. The question box has been buzzing, so I'll try to get through a few of those with you. Are the trainings on benchmarks and family engagement available online as e-learning or just face-to-face opportunities at this time?
That's a great question, and I wish I could say that they were available on an e-learning opportunity, but they are not at this time. We were so busy ramping up that we were only able to consider doing those face-to-face. But our next step, too, as part of this training plan, is to develop some webinars that will be distributed all across the state, and I'm in that process of asking if those will be recorded, and if they are, we would be very happy to share them.
Great. I think that Robert, the person who asked that question, was prepared for that answer because he then followed up with, do you have written lesson plans or just notes for those?
We have outlines for the trainings. If that would be helpful, I would be happy to share those because we made sure those were fully developed before we did the training so that we could take a look at what the content was. So I'd be happy to share those.
Okay, and that takes care of his third question. So we'll help in distributing those if you would like. All right, Vicki has asked, do you have any best practices that you can share for McV sites that contract out for their providers from other agencies and often different agencies due to multiple McV sites?
Okay, we in Wyoming are only doing one model. Is she referring to a single model? Is she referring to?
Well, she doesn't say. She's speaking about best practices, what to include in those contracted provider contracts to ensure a high standard or services and delivery of those services. So I don't think it's about the model necessarily.
Okay, it's about the contractor. Okay, that is a great question. We contracted out for the evaluator and our CQI, and we found that the best practice would be to do also a in-depth onboarding process to the work also, because if someone has not done the depth of this data collection before and understands the need to collect what is being collected, it causes, some challenges as you move forward and are developing that system. So I would say a really in-depth onboarding process with each of the folks that you're contracting with as well.
Great.
I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Well, she asked a follow-up, and do you include that process within the contract as an expectation?
I would highly suggest that, yes. That would be best practice to do that.
Okay. All right. We have we have two questions from Marion. Have you developed a core competencies, and what parameters do you use to decide what trainings are needed for home visiting?
That's a wonderful question. With our model, we have core competencies, and we are in the process, right now, of unpacking those core competencies and really deciding which are the most important ones to tackle first, because you cannot, there is no way to take all of them and train everybody without overwhelming them with information. Again, it's that idea that the knowledge and the skills are important, and they have to have the knowledge first, and they have to have opportunity and time to integrate it in. So I would take a look at your staff and sort of assess across the board which area or areas you feel are most important to focus on initially, and then lay out a plan for giving them time to implement, come back and kind of do a check-in where they are to make sure that you're helping them get to that next level, but not, to prioritize the core competencies for home visiting.
Great. Okay. And then finally, we have a question. How are you managing the life skills progression training with staff turnover occurring?
That's a great question. We've been able to manage it well the first time only because of the timing that the new staff were hired. They were going to be coming to our Parents as Teachers National Conference, so we went ahead and asked the new staff if they could come a day early so that we could do a face-to-face training with them. Now, as future turnover happens, what we'll probably have to do is to find a state nearby, hopefully, that is offering the training, and probably have to send them to that state to do a face-to-face training.
Okay. All right. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for questions for Jan. We will be sure to include any unanswered questions and answers from all of our speakers in the post-webinar packet that you'll be receiving. So if you didn't get your question in, go ahead and send that right away, and we'll add that to that document. But I'd like to move on to our last speaker. And I'm happy to introduce Laurel Aparicio. Laurel is the director of Virginia's Home Visiting Consortium. She started in this new position just last month after spending 3 years on the McVie team at the Virginia Department of Health. In her new role, she will continue to work with the Consortium's training committee to build a comprehensive professional development system for Virginia home visitors. Welcome, Laurel.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Katrina. I'd like to start out by saying how much I really appreciated hearing from both Tracy and Jan about what they're doing at the individual and program level. And so now I'm excited to share what we're doing in Virginia to support professional development at the state level. I think it's a really nice progressive way to consider this subject. But before we jump too quickly into the details of what we're doing here in our state, I think it's important to understand a bit about how our system has evolved over time and the frameworks and concepts that we've embraced and that have really contributed to where we are now. In Virginia, we have a very long history of working together collaboratively at the state level to support our home visiting programs, and almost 10 years ago, our Home Visiting Consortium was formed, and it was formed in large part to address the needs that existed across all of our programs, regardless of the model being implemented, things like training, professional development, public awareness, and so forth. And the consortium is made up of leaders from each of our early childhood home visiting programs, and in Virginia, we have 8 different program models represented on our consortium. The consortium also includes leaders from the state agencies that support home visiting services, as well as other early childhood leaders from all across the state. And from the outset, the consortium identified the development of home visitor training as one of its most fundamental roles, and initially identified 10 core training areas, and pulled together resources from across the different agencies and programs to begin developing trainings in those different areas. Some of the trainings were live, some were web-based, and some were shared resources that had been developed by our partner organizations, like a mandated reporter training, for example, that was developed by our State Department of Social Services. And early on, we also partnered up with one of our state universities, James Madison, University, or JMU, for those of you who are familiar, to develop and implement our statewide system for training. A couple of years ago, with the influx of the McV funding, we were able to invest quite a bit more into our training system. And so we pulled together a new cross-sector consortium committee to expand our training system. And we really have worked hard to be as inclusive as possible so that all of the home visiting models are represented. We also have program supervisors on the committee, training and technical assistance specialists, a home visitor, folks from early intervention, child care, infant mental health, and so forth. So we're really getting the full spectrum of the early childhood development system as part of the planning and development process. And together, we set out to develop a comprehensive home visiting professional development system. And as we got into that process, we very quickly realized that in order to truly support a comprehensive system, we would need to do more than simply offer training, that we would need to create a foundation that really supported the ongoing learning, exploration, and skill building that's critical to true professional development. And that we needed to recognize the important role that both home visitors and supervisors play in this process. So a big part of our professional development system has been the development of a plan to support all of the players in the transfer of learning process. So before I get too far into talking about our model, I'd like to share our vision, which is on the next screen. Thanks. And we've been very intentional, our committee, to include the values and the guiding principles that we believe are essential to building a comprehensive system that supports not only home visitors, but also supervisors. And we believe that all trainings must be high quality, that our system is ultimately sustainable over the long haul, that it's based on competencies, is tiered to meet the changing needs of staff over time, that it promotes best practice, incorporates current research, and is linked to our state's evaluation outcomes. This next slide provides a visual representation of how we envision our system evolving and what we believe belongs in a comprehensive system. And at the base of the pyramid, you see core competencies. And we believe that all professional development activities should be grounded in supporting the core competencies that are essential to effective service delivery. The first tier of trainings are what we consider to be foundational. And on the right-hand side, you'll see our core trainings. Those are our consortium core trainings that we offer. Our community training events that happen typically at the local level, formal education that staff may bring with them. And then on the left side, an equally important role in the foundational training are, of course, the model-specific trainings around model implementation, as well as training in the different curriculums that are utilized by the different models in our state. And it's really this first tier of trainings that are specifically designed to support our core competencies. And the second tier, or the inverted triangle, tends to overlap and build upon these more foundational trainings by exploring the topics more fully or introducing more advanced application and skill-building activities. And then finally, at the top of our pyramid, our third tier of training includes more specialized topics and learning communities. And at this point, we are offering 17 different trainings in each of the core topic areas, and we've also added some additional supplemental trainings. All of our trainings are free, and they're designed to be accessible for home visitors all across the state. And so they're offered on a rotating basis in each region of the state. In the last year, we really have focused a whole lot of energy on developing our home visitor competencies, and our consortium has recently formally adopted the competencies. So now we're in the process of identifying any gaps in our core trainings to ensure that we have trainings in place to support the development of each of the competency areas. And then we plan to have all of our foundational trainings completed by the end of the year. And once we've been able to complete all of the trainings to support the competencies, we plan to develop a Virginia Home Visitor Certificate. So over the next few months, our entire system is going to be updated to reflect this new competency-based approach. As we move on to the next slide, what you see here is a snapshot from our website, and it's part of our training page. And currently, our home visitors are able to access all of our trainings through our website. And, I think it's pretty straightforward the way that it's set up at this point. The trainings are listed. They're identified as either web-based or classroom or live trainings, and there's a brief description provided. As we roll out our new system, we'll be able to demonstrate the alignment of each training to the competency that it supports. And we'll be able to expand our tiered system by introducing more advanced trainings. As a matter of fact, last year we were able to roll out our very first foundational to advanced training series, which you can see here as number 7. It's on the screen. It's the Screening and Brief Intervention Skills, a series for home visitors. And what you see is a series in which each training builds upon the previous training and is a prerequisite for the next training. So part 1 is a basic web-based training that shares information related to the importance of behavioral health risk screening. And then part 2 builds on this learning content and introduces motivational interviewing. And this is a full-day training that was designed specifically for home visitors. And then finally, part 3 is our expert for home visitors, which again, builds upon the previous trainings and introduces the screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment model. And the expert is a model that's traditionally been used in the substance abuse field, but again, it was specifically adapted to address the needs of our home visitors and support what we were really hearing was their need for effective strategies to use in their work with families, particularly when they were identifying a behavioral health issue or need with the family. Our next slide really illustrates how we have begun to embrace a system and a model of continued learning and transfer of learning. We really realized that in order to be effective, we needed to not only provide training, but we needed to understand and incorporate strategies for supporting the continued learning needs of home visitors in a way that truly supports the integration and application of the new knowledge and skills without requiring the home visitor to constantly attend training outside of the office and take time away from their work with families. And so we adopted this transfer of learning model and developed a transfer of learning plan, and this is now the framework upon which our training system is built. Traditionally, when we think about and design training, the bulk of the responsibility for the transfer of learning has been seen as the responsibility of the trainer and the trainee, which essentially translates to if you have a good teacher with good material and a good, or rather a willing student, the training will be successful. But this model recognizes the very important role that supervisors play in supporting that learning. It reflects our role as the training provider to support the home visitor and the supervisor to ensure a true transfer of learning. And as you can see, we believe that each player plays an equal part in the successful transfer of learning. This next slide gives, again, a snapshot of a portion of our transfer of learning plan. And it's in this plan that we detail those roles and responsibilities. And the plan provides a basic guide as to what activities should take place before, during, and after a training event in order to truly support the transfer of learning in the most meaningful way. And it serves as a good reminder for supervisors that they have to take an active role at each point in the learning process. And as you can see, this plan takes into account the very important role that supervisors play in effectively ensuring that staff are integrating new knowledge and skills in their work with families. As a matter of fact, if you look at this one section of the plan, you notice that the supervisor has more responsibilities checked off than any of the other players. So this has really helped us to intentionally focus all of our work by understanding our roles and responsibilities in the professional development process and ensuring that our work always supports each role that home visitors and their supervisors play in the process. And in order to do that, we had to develop strategies to support supervisors in a different way. So over the last year, our university partner, James Madison, crisscrossed the state and met with supervisors in each of the home visiting models to share this transfer of learning plan with them. They also solicited their feedback on our current training system, gathered input on the future of the training system, learned more about their needs, and began the process of designing a system that encourages open dialogue so that we can ensure that supervisors are included in the ongoing development and implementation of our training system. We really want to know what's working and what's not working so we can develop a system that's as responsive to their needs as possible. Next slide.
Laurel, I'd just like to interrupt you for 1 second. We're some questions about what HEDG means in that at the top of the second to last column.
I'm sorry. That is the department name for our university partner.
Okay.
Within JMU, that is their departmental acronym.
All right. Thank you.
Sorry. Thanks. As we move on, I'd like to talk about what we are doing to support supervisors. I've talked a whole lot about our trainings for home visitors, and while most of our efforts have focused on training for home visitors, we're very well aware of the unique training and support needs of program supervisors and the important role that supervisors play in staff development and ultimately in staff retention really cannot be overstated. Not only do they need support to be as effective as possible in their supervisory capacity, but they also really need opportunities for professional development, peer support, and networking. So we've been working to incorporate opportunities for supervisors as well and plan to focus more energy on this once we've been able to complete all of the foundational trainings for home visitors. But we are currently doing several things to support supervisors. First, earlier this year, we kicked off a year-long reflective supervision training project that includes 4 face-to-face training events and monthly small group reflective supervisory sessions. This training project is being led by national experts from Michigan, and we partnered up with our Office on Early Childhood Mental Health Services to offer the training. We have 31 supervisors and trainers from all across the state participating in this intensive project. We took this approach for a number of reasons. First, we really wanted to provide a meaningful experience to support supervisors in their work. Our program supervisors are wearing a whole lot of different hats, and they are often just as overwhelmed as home visitors by paperwork, administrative responsibilities, and, additionally, we're really seeing that they have increased needs to support their staff and guide their staff as they are reporting that they're serving families who are presenting with much greater needs and at much higher risk than ever before. So this training was designed to support them, build and enhance their reflective skills, while also building capacity for supervisors and home visitors to seek the infant mental health endorsement. Supervisors are receiving, through this training, the required reflective supervision for
Laurel, I think we've lost you.
Hello?
Oh, there you are. I'm sorry, you dropped off just about 30 seconds ago.
Okay. That's odd. Okay, well, I'll just go back just a brief bit to talk about the reflective supervision then. You still got me?
That sounds good.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so the reflective supervision training was designed to support our supervisors and to build and enhance their skills, but also to build capacity in our state for our home visiting supervisors and home visitors to seek the infant mental health endorsement. So supervisors are receiving through the training the required reflective supervision for endorsement, and they're in turn going to be qualified to provide the required reflective supervision for their staff to meet the endorsement requirement. And we have also had several of our trainers participating in the project who will be qualified to provide the training ongoing into the future. So we've really worked hard to design a sustainable process for not only delivering the training, but to also support the professional development needs of home visitors and supervisors while working to create career ladder opportunities for them as well. And another way that we're supporting supervisors to be able to effectively engage in their staff's professional development is by developing supervisor guides for each of our trainings. And these guides offer suggested activities to extend the learning experience, recommended resources for future staff development activities. They reinforce key learning objectives, and they offer opportunities for more advanced skill building. The guides are located on a password-protected page that's set up and designed just for supervisors. And at this point, it primarily includes the guides and some other archived webinars and resources and so forth, but we really hope to enhance this feature by adding sharing opportunities and some sort of a forum for supervisors to dialogue with one another and share feedback and suggestions with us. And then finally, by the end of the year, we plan to have completed our supervisor competencies. And we're actually working together with our infant toddler network to develop a set of supervisor competencies that will meet both of our needs. And then we'll be able to use these in the same way that we're using our home visitor competencies to identify any gaps in our training for supervisors and build a tiered training system for them. The next slide really emphasizes how important it's been for all of us to work together with our early childhood partners, to involve them in the process as we've developed all the different parts and pieces that have gone into our system. And everything we do is we approach as an opportunity to collaborate. We really embrace the notion that collaboration results in a more robust system, and whenever possible, we share resources to avoid duplication and try to build upon things that may already exist. And now that we've designed our system, we really look forward to increasing opportunities for collaborative training projects to enhance professional development opportunities across the entire early childhood system. And recently, the Virginia Cross-Sector Professional Development Organization was established in our state to do just that. The VCPD, which you see at the bottom bullet there, is specifically designed for early childhood service providers to promote high-quality, integrated professional development opportunities. And I've included their website and encourage you to check it out and learn more about the project. And there's just a ton of great resources on that site. I know my time is running out, so I really want to talk very quickly about our plans for the future. I've already talked about most of these, but I want to wrap things up by discussing just briefly how all this fits together and helps to enhance staff retention. Look, I think we all inherently understand that professional development is essential to staff retention. And over the next year, two of the most important pieces that we hope to add to truly support staff retention are the introduction of learning communities and a Virginia Home Visitor Certificate. We are really trying to respond to the changing needs of home visitors, and one of the things that we continually hear from them is the need for more opportunities to share and network with one another. So we plan to offer regionally based learning communities to provide training, support, and networking opportunities for home visitors and supervisors. And we hope to be able to roll out a certificate that will be recognized throughout the state. And this is a critical step in establishing a well-defined career ladder for our home visitors. So through a variety of efforts, our Home Visiting Consortium is working to further develop the recognition of home visiting as a profession, build a career ladder that allows home visitors and supervisors to advance in the field, and to ultimately increase salaries in a sustainable way for home visitors across our entire state. And all of these are activities that contribute significantly to staff retention, which in turn, of course, promotes the best outcomes for families and the greatest impact in all of our communities. As I wrap things up, I would just like to share our web address, which is on the last slide. If you'd like to learn anything more about our training system, please feel free to visit our website at the address on the screen, or, feel free to contact me as well. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Laurel. I have to tell you, we're getting virtual cartwheels and fireworks in the question box. People are very excited about this. So, I'm going to try to summarize a couple of the questions for you. The first one, how long did it take to build this system, I think is interesting.
Gosh, well, I have to say, like I said, the consortium itself started working on this almost 10 years ago. And it was slow going initially because, the members had to pull very limited resources. And a lot of times they were, developing the trainings themselves. Probably 2.5 years ago, is when we really started in earnest working on fleshing out the system. And initially our first goal was to get those core trainings all completed, that original vision that the consortium had when they came together. And as we started thinking about developing career ladder opportunities, that's when we took a step back and said, I think it's time to think about the system in a more comprehensive way and develop those competencies. And the competencies took us, we had slated about 6 months to work on it, but it took us well over a year to get those done. And I'm sure that's no surprise to anybody who's done the work, but it's incredibly time consuming. And I think we all appreciate all that goes into the work that our home visitors do with families. But putting it down on paper gives you a incredibly different perspective and a real unique perspective on that. So it's been about 2.5 years since we've really been able to ramp up and fully kind of develop out the rest of it.
Great. That's a lot of work for 2.5 years.
It is.
A lot of people are asking if this training is open to anyone nationally, or is it really just available in Virginia right now?
At this point, all of our web-based trainings are available. Anyone can register for them. Our live trainings are specifically designed for our home visitors in Virginia. We are looking at ways to sustain the trainings over time, and we may look at developing some sort of fee structure. But, understandably, all of this was developed, through public dollars. So we will keep this as low cost and accessible as possible over the long term. But that's our goal, to be able to share it with whoever needs it, truly.
Great. I have a feeling you'll be getting contacted. And a question from Sarita. Does the Virginia Home Visitor Certificate correlate to something other than all trainings have been completed? So is it for college credit or the infant mental health endorsement?
At this point, we haven't developed that. We have been focused on getting the competencies in place and then the training, of course, to support those competencies. Our goal is, in Virginia, we do have some very strong early childhood systems and professional development systems already in place. And there's a couple of folks who have either developed an endorsement or credential process, like the infant mental health, that it makes sense for us at this point to develop reciprocal relationships with, so that what we envision right now is that we will do a crosswalk with those different credentialing organizations so that they will, when a home visitor presents with a certificate, they will know that they have the required training that meets their endorsement requirements. So that's what we're working towards at this point.
And Robert has asked, are there other perks that come with that certificate for home visitors?
Well, at this point, again, we haven't developed it. I would love to see that other perks that could come along with it would be career ladder opportunities. And because we do work across all of the different sectors of, and disciplines in the early childhood field, I'd like to see us begin to think about how we recognize each other's endorsements and how systems can be developed to really support advancement and professional development across those different disciplines.
Great. So that's all the time that we have for questions for Laurel. A lot of you throughout the webinar have asked questions about how to access specific resources that our speakers are talking about, and I will pass that on to our speakers to see if we can put that in the follow-up packet to today's webinar. I want to give a very big thank you to all of our speakers today. We really appreciate your time and commitment to this topic. You've each shared some great information, and it really helped us all to think about intentional selection of staff, onboarding, and ongoing professional development and support. Before we sign off today, I do want to remind everyone to watch your email for that follow-up packet. We'll try to get that to you by next week. And remind you that we will have a webinar on April 28th as well. That webinar will be used to help us kick off a learning community on domestic violence, so please mark your calendars and plan to join us for that. And finally, just a quick reminder to please let us know what you thought about today's webinar. Your feedback is very important to us, and by taking the time to complete the evaluation, you will be receiving soon via email from WRMA. Thanks again for joining us today and for all that you do every day to support families. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
And ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude today's conference. We thank you for your participation.